Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what I think is the 8th episode of Psyched podcast. We're really excited tonight. I'm in a little bit of a different location. I'm in the lobby of a Marriott right now. I had some travel difficulties, got kind of held up a little bit, so I've had a rough day. I feel kind of gross and unprepared, but I'm still excited to be here, and I'm hoping that people are still tuning in and are excited to talk as well. I'm Rachel. I'm an NCSP, currently working in the state of Texas. Anna?
I'm Anna, school psych, working in New York State. And Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I'm a school psych working in Connecticut. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about how to participate tonight. I'm going to have, as we're chatting, I'm going to have the windows for School Psyched, your School Psychologist Facebook page, also School Psyched podcast page, and Twitter, all open. So you can comment or ask questions on any of those pages. You can, on Twitter, use the hashtag psychedpodcast. And feel free to comment anywhere on the other pages. I should get new notifications as we go.
Very nice. We definitely want a lot of participation. Okay, before we get into our topics, I know, Anna, that you had posted a poll if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I was looking to get the perspective of school psychs out there on the board-certified behavior analysts because I want to know how experienced psychs are with working with BCBAs. So I personally don't have any BCBAs in my organization, and so I know that there's some in my area, but not a lot. It's not really a big thing where I am geographically. It's not a big movement yet, but I know that it is for some people. So as far as our poll, we didn't exactly get a huge response, so this is not like a well-distributed normative sample, but 9 people said that they have no BCBAs working with them in their district or building. 4 do work with BCBAs, and 2 are working towards that credential, and 1 person already has it. So some school psychs have that, and some don't and don't work with them. So it's really interesting and something that I personally want to learn more about, and it's cool. Speaking of cool things that we can all relate to, I thought before we got started on our BCBA topic, we could share a little tidbit that psychs out there could possibly relate to. So we have like ongoing conversations, the 3 of us, about what we're going to do for our podcast, right? So one of us accidentally sent a picture of their office to the other people, like by accident in our group conversation, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so jealous right now because I have not had an office for many years. I'm a school psych without an office. So I travel to different buildings and I try to get space. And so one of my counseling spaces is a borrowed office from someone else. One of my other counseling spaces is the OT-PT room, where I have my little corner where I do counseling while the OT's over here doing OT, the PT's over here doing PT. Sometimes the speech person's at the table over here. It's just a big hot mess. And then there's the counseling in the hallway, because if you don't have the room scheduled and set up at a certain time, you have to do counseling in the hallway. Like, what are you going to do? It's frustrating. I don't know if any psychs out there can relate, but guys, tell us about your office space.
Yeah, we definitely will read out some comments and whatnot. I can say on my end, I've had like a big variety of offices because I have been in a couple different districts and for sure several different schools, and it just varies school by school. I've had no office at all. I've had a closet, which didn't have any windows or anything, so I couldn't really close the door because something with a fire hazard being in there because it would lock. And then I've had a small classroom to myself for 1 year, which was really nice. I had an office, like a big fancy office up at the main front office there, which was cool. And then this year I have an office with a conference table and lots of chairs, but that's mostly because I'm expected to, as part of my duties this year, run annual meetings. So I kind of wish that I could trade in the big office with the conference table if I didn't have to run all those meetings type of thing. But how about you, Rebecca? What's your situation?
I have a great office that I love. It's really very tight, but it does fit 3 adults in very close quarters, and it fits. I can work one-on-one with a student. Maybe in a tiny little group, I have a bench and 2 chairs plus my desk and chair, and I love my office. I dressed it up. I made it cozy. I'm lobbying for the room next door, which may be free. It's a math enrichment room right now, but it has a big table, and I would love that because I have groups in there, and I wouldn't have to be like you guys, I scramble for space sometimes whenever I need to hold more children. So, but I love my office. Yeah, tell us about your offices. Please comment on Facebook. Tell us what kind of
Post
space.
pictures if you have them.
Yeah. That's School Psyched podcast or Psyched podcast, right? If you're on this Twitter. Okay, so from this moment forward, if anyone says BA, they're talking about behavior analyst or behavior analysis, not badass. Okay, let's get started.
Yeah. All right, so should I introduce our guest? Are we ready, guys?
Go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so our guest is, I'm really excited to have her. She's Dr. Christine Reeve. She's a consultant to schools working with ASD across the country, a behavior analyst, a university professor, a blogger, and an author. She also runs an awesome Facebook page that posts articles and resources called Classroom Autism News. I hope I'm saying that right, but I'm going to make sure. And so I think we're ready to introduce Dr. Reeve.
All right, let's bring her on in.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Reeve. I am from Autism Classroom News.
Autism.
And
I can't see you yet. I'm sorry.
Yeah, wait, let me double check.
You might have to hit the camera button up.
There. Are we good now?
We're good. Sorry.
And I run a blog as well as a Facebook page that's designed to share for schools and families who are working with students with autism across the spectrum, across the ages, and trying very hard to keep the information out there so that everyone has access to it and share resources as we find them, because no one has time to find every resource out there on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
For sure, kind of I think a theme that we share is, getting resources out to people.
Yeah.
So, Chris, for those of us who are unfamiliar, can you tell us a little bit about BCBA, what it means? So, what do you have to get there to be one?
I'm a board-certified behavior analyst, and the D is for the doctoral level. And there's actually now there's 4 different levels of certification. There are behavior techs who are not necessarily certified behavior analysts. There are behavior analyst assistants who are BCABAs. Generally, they're folks with bachelor's degree and 3 or 4 courses and supervised experience. There's a master's level, which is the most common, and people generally have a master's in a related field as well as supervised experience and a specific set of courses. And then there is a doctoral designation now that requires a doctorate in ABA related material with a behavioral dissertation and specific coursework. And so I've been a behavior analyst since before there was a national certification. It started as a Florida certification in our developmental disabilities community. And I became certified through that, and then I became certified at the national level. Many states now also have licenses in behavior analysis that generally will take the requirements from the BCBA, but will control them on a state level to protect consumers. So we're seeing that happen more and more.
Okay. Very neat. I thought it was interesting. One of our viewers had posted that as far as school psych programs, that I think in California that they were integrating that into school psych programs, so that I'm assuming that when you're graduating as a school psych, you also maybe have that credential as well.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I had not heard that before. It's a good overlap to have. So it was interesting to see that California is really kind of taking that initiative.
Mm-hmm. I knew I had a colleague last year who there was a push from our district that we wanted more BCBAs because we had a lot of parents that were asking for that type of therapy in the school system, and we had been contracting for it, and so the school wanted to provide, our own staff people because it would be a lot cheaper. And so our district was like, hey, Psychs, anyone maybe look at your courses and let us know if you might be close to getting that. If you have to take a couple more classes to do it, please do it. And the district was pushing for that. And so I had one colleague who decided to do that. And it ended up she needed an extra 1.5 years of coursework in order to get that. So it wasn't just a 1 or 2 classes thing for her.
Yeah, generally you won't see a lot of overlap between the school psych curriculum and the ABA curriculum unless the school psych program was a behavioral program. My background's actually in clinical psychology, and I've kind of been grandfathered in over time, but my clinical psychology program was very behavioral. And so most people are probably going to need about 5 to 6 classes in order to get certified, and then you need generally about 1 year of supervision at the master's level. I've had a number of school psychologists that I've worked with in my consultation that I actually did supervision with, who then became certified. So as part of our contract with the district, I actually worked with them to become certified to be that kind of resource for their district.
So
very cool.
When you do, Chris, do you do any counseling at all as part of your treatment, or is it no?
I work almost entirely with school systems, and I work with students sometimes in the school systems, and I might work with the teams to develop the behavior programs or the educational programs or training the teachers, but my job is really more working with the staff than the kids themselves.
Oh, I see. And so you're working with them on behavior programs. How is that different from a behavior plan that a school psych would work with teachers and staff?
It's not that different. Generally, I'll go in and do a functional behavior assessment. Sometimes it'll be on a student that maybe the school psych already did one and we're still not seeing any kind of changes. Sometimes it might be that there is none, but it's a high-profile case, or the family is pushing for it, or school psych is asking for more help. And so I'll go in and do an FBA kind of as an outside consultant. I have some school districts that I contract with on a regular basis. One, for instance, is a large district. It has its own 2 BCBAs within it. So my job is to do the assessment, is to be a sounding board for them. And then I have another one that's a very small district where I do a lot more of the FBAs for the kids with developmental disabilities of different kinds.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm sort of wondering about the connection between behavior analysis in schools, and I don't have any in my school. I know in my area there's 2 districts that require autism specialists to gain that credential to continue their employment, and also a behavior specialist, like a district-wide position. One of the districts in my area wants someone to have that credential to help support the entire district. So I know those 2 things, but overall it sounds like consulting and writing behavior plans are 2 things where a school psych might interface with a BCBA.
Yeah.
What about ABA itself, teaching kids through ABA? Is that something that you guys help set up? Or?
Yeah, and it really depends. It's so. I'm sure you guys have experienced the difference in school psychologists across the country. As I've gone across the country over the last 15 years, what school psychologists do differs tremendously from place to place. So I have districts where all the school psychologists do is test. And I have other places where they're almost mini administrators. And I have other places where they really do the counseling, and other places where it's the guidance counselors do more of the counseling, and the school psychologists have other duties. Behavior analysts are kind of the same way in terms of how we interface with the school district. So depending on what the role is, I might come in as a consultant and help figure out a plan that the school psychologist then oversees and sees through within a classroom. In one district I work in, the school psychologists generally do the functional behavior assessments, except for some students where the behavior analysts do the behavior assessments. And it's kind of confusing. But the BCBA isn't usually an educational certification. So, for instance, I used to do a lot of work in high-profile cases for a very large district that finally said, let's get our own BCBA. And we used to laugh because I used to say, this is great. But because you made them have to be a certified school personnel, I don't qualify for that job.
Oh,
So because state departments don't recognize the BCBA as a credential in most states. So it's kind of like the difference between a clinical psychologist and a school psychologist.
right.
In most states, you can practice in a school as a school psychologist, but generally a clinical psychologist might not be eligible. Same kind of thing.
Wow. And are your, I'm just curious about your initials. Can you switch them? Can you put PhD also, or is it?
Yes, yes, usually mine is PhD, BCBA, D.
Okay. That's good.
The more letters, the better, right?
Yes, I love those letters. I wanted to ask you also, so when you go in and you're looking at an intervention on behaviors, is it always kind of remediation? I mean, is it always a problem behavior that you're looking at, or sometimes you go in and say this child could benefit from, you know, social skills and kind of like work on that positive end of the spectrum? Do you do that as well?
Well, and because my job is typically as an autism consultant, and my BCBA is part of that, but my expertise is both autism as well as significant behavior disorders. I do a lot of very holistic, let's plan a whole program. My goal is, let's put a program in place so we don't have to have a big behavior plan in place. And then I see a lot of higher functioning kids that the behavior plan is not your traditional, this is what you're going to do about the behavior problem, but these are the kinds of supports the student needs to be successful academically and socially and things like that. And I approach behavior from a very functional perspective. My dissertation actually was on how do we teach communication to prevent problem behaviors from increasing. And so my behavior plan is very much not a reactive behavior plan, but a what do we need to put in place to prevent the behavior, and then what are we teaching you to do? So it can take place well before you hit a crisis state, which has been fun. And I've done a lot of work with the higher functioning kids, and it really expanded the view of what a behavior plan looks like, because we have some kids, we've written some pretty strong support plans for that people wouldn't necessarily identify in those school districts as he has a problem. It's like, no, we just know that he needs this to be successful, and it's easier for the team if I put all the supports in place.
Right. I don't know if anybody out there had a chance to click on School Psyched, your school psychologist page, the Time magazine article. I got it from you, Chris, on Twitter. It was a story of a boy named Charlie who has autism, but it was an example of how assessment falls short, because this little boy was nonverbal, but when they put an intervention in place, he found that through a letterboard, he was brilliant. I mean, he could read at a level grades above him and comment on, I think it was Huckleberry Finn, and it was an amazing. There's a video on that story. It's on School Psyched, your school psychologist page. The Time magazine article. It's called "Autism Reveals Problems and How We Measure Success." Is that the kind of work that you do with individual students?
It varies, and I would say we have to be really careful with those stories. I think that we have a lot of kids that people, if kids don't talk, we have good research that shows that people expect less of them. So we try very hard to give them a way to communicate. So I work a lot with assistive technology and augmentative communication teams, trying to help them determine what kinds of supports they need to be able to get their needs met. But I think we live in an age in which there's this thought of, I'll give this kid an iPad, and suddenly he'll be a typical kid. And I think we have to be careful that we're not thinking that way.
Right.
There's still a lot of challenges to overcome, but there's a lot of stuff in there that it's difficult to get out.
Yeah.
And especially with very young kids, we see a lot of high-functioning kids who are very, very smart, but definitely have autism. And at the preschool level, we have a lot of people who look at them and say, well, they don't need an intensive program because they've got all the academic. And in reality, what the research literature tells us is that those are the kids that if we were to provide intensive early intervention for them, they're the kids that are going to go out and not need supports later on because they're going to be okay. But if we say, oh, see how well they're functioning, they don't need much, they're going to fall farther and farther behind. And so I see that as a challenge that a lot of schools and school psychologists are facing in terms of being able to demonstrate that academic impact of the disability. We really have to be skilled at looking at how do they function in a group. Are they going to be able to learn and perform in a group activity? And that's why we have a lot of high-functioning kids who don't get identified until they're 11, when they were already have been struggling for a few years. And if you looked at them early, we would see that, but people kind of went, oh, it's mild, so it's not a big deal. But that early intervention really makes a huge difference for them.
So what do you think about the assessment? What are the assessments that you like, that you don't like?
I mean, I think it's so individualized. And I think one of the biggest things is if you have the opportunity as a school psychologist to observe and work with large numbers of kids with autism, it'll make you a stronger assessor. It's one of those things that I see, not necessarily school psychologists, but anybody who's seen a couple kids look at some kids and go, oh, he doesn't have it because he's, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have these kinds of issues because I've only seen these few kids. Their symptoms are so varied that our assessment battery has got to be very individualized to try to get at the needs that we have for each of them. I think we've got to make sure that we're assessing the social piece. We've got to make sure that we're assessing the pragmatic piece and the use of communication and language for social purposes, as well as the behavior and the rigidity and things like that. So I think that piece of it, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of disorder, and I think that makes it really tough. Because some of our high-functioning kids in particular don't always show up on the standardized tests with the significant deficits, and we really have to look for them in a sense, which is somewhat directly different than what people are told to do as a school psychologist, which is to assess them and keep kids out of special ed, not necessarily not giving them services that they need, but their job is to keep them in the general ed classroom as much as possible. When for some of our kids, if we gave them more intensive intervention, down the road it may be more beneficial.
That is really, really, really good information to have. I want to write it all down and after I watch the podcast again. So I don't want to I have so many thoughts about my personal experiences, and kids are in so many different ratios of classes that I work with and stuff, and I don't really want to go there. You kind of alluded to, sometimes smaller is better and more intense earlier is better. But I would just love to get inside of your brain and hear about what are those things that you set up for kids that set them up for success, those proactive things that are in your atypical kind of behavior intervention or whatever plans that will help our kids perform and prevent those meltdowns. Because I think once I get involved, it's already there's stuff flying across the room or there's aggression. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I want to set that environment up for these kids. I want to be there to help them, and not just when they're flipping out.
Not just having to be reactive, right?
Exactly.
And I think it's hard. I think for most of our kids, I would say a highly structured environment where things are consistent, where there is not a lockstep, everything's the same all the time kind of program, but there is a routine that's followed. I used to think that flexible was really kind of what I was looking for in a teacher for a kid with autism, until I discovered that you could actually be too flexible, and that was even worse because I had a teacher who could never have the same thing at the same time every day. And I remember sitting down with her and saying, we chose her because she was going to be so flexible. She's a great teacher. And she's like, I said, can we have snack at the same time every day? No, I don't think I can. I'm like, okay, well, my child will be underneath the desk screaming because it's time for snack. And finally I had to say, we're going to have snack at this time. If your kids want to join us, that would be lovely. But it was just too much flexibility. And so I think that structure and that routine helps all our kids. It's not just kids with autism. Giving them a way that represents their day and they can tell what's going to happen next. For some of our kids, it's just what's the next step. For some of our kids, it's what's happening this afternoon. Picking, one of the things I tell families a lot, and I tell teachers the same thing, is pick your battles. Pick the thing that you're going to kind of address now and try to structure everything else so that other things can go smoothly and you can work on the one thing that you're trying to teach. I think the earlier that we teach the communication skills is important, making sure that even if this kid can repeat the entire evening news, it doesn't necessarily mean that he can ask for a banana or help or to go to the bathroom. And so then we really want to look at, is his language really functional to meet his needs? And we know that teaching those kinds of skills can prevent a lot of challenging behaviors. I think teaching self-regulation early on is critical. If kids are at a point where they can begin to learn to monitor and understand their own behavior to some degree, whether it's just learning to do a token system that the teacher handles, all the way up from using something like the incredible 5-point scale to say, I'm a 4, and in order to get back to a 1, I could ask to take a walk and get a drink of water, get out of the classroom, and maybe that'll bring my level down. And being able to do that is a really critical skill that a lot of our kids need direct instruction with. And then the social piece, because the social piece and knowing how to handle social environments are the things that lose our kids' jobs when they get older. I've known so many college graduates who can't go on to a job and they can't keep a job because they don't understand that you don't just walk off the job when you decide it's time to take a break, or they don't understand how to interact with their peers and none of the other coworkers want them around. And so that to me is a really critical piece. Our classrooms are such social places, and I don't think we always realize that either. So we see our kids really struggle a lot with group work, with having to have a partner to do something. You know, a lot of times they are the kid that people are like, well, he knows everything, but I don't want to be with him. He tells me that he knows everything, and he doesn't let me talk. You know, he always has to be the leader. I don't want him to always be the leader. We have to teach them how to manage those situations, because those are real-life situations that we all find ourselves in. So to me, those are really the preventive pieces, or that social communication piece early on, and the self-regulation, that if we can teach those. Now, for our kids that are more complex, it's being able to follow a direction, being able to do simple tasks, being able to follow a schedule. We're at a much lower level, but we really have to get those basics in there, because otherwise he's going to be 11 and we're going to just be following him around the room trying to get him to do something instead of him being able to sit down and do it. I also think independence is a huge one. So I use a lot of independent work systems, structure to help kids learn. I'm going to do something I know how to do, and nobody's going to help me. Because a lot of times our solution is these kids need a lot of supervision, we add people to them, and then they come to depend on those people. So we have to be really careful about how we structure that.
I've for sure seen that a lot at the high school level, where kids come in from moving up into 9th grade, and they've had a one-on-one aid for so long, and we try, and I'm like, let's try and get away from that. And not only are the kids dependent on that, but the parents are used to that, and it's hard to get away from.
And a lot of times the parents are used to having the same person all day. So they're used to being able to go, say, to the aide and get information about how their kid's day was. And I have a real issue with that, because that's really the teacher's responsibility, is to be the person that knows what's going on with the kid. It shouldn't be left up to a paraprofessional. And then I've also seen kids, especially in smaller districts, where they've had the same aide for 5 years. And it's like, okay, they're a little too close now, and then switching is really hard for them, because that person's not going to follow them around for the rest of their life.
So in listening to you, and I mean, I think that we can all, picture how a school psych and BCBA and a lot of these interventions can for sure work together, and there seems to be a lot of overlap there. Now, what about when a BCBA is hired to come in for the purpose of ABA therapy? Can you just tell us a little bit about what ABA therapy might look like in the home setting, and then also in the school setting, and if there's any differences, and how we should be working with people to facilitate anything with that?
I'm assuming when you say ABA therapy, you mean like a discrete trial program that the kids are getting, especially early on. And so they're getting a very structured kind of teaching that we can do in a classroom. And I think one of the things that I advocate for is different districts do it different ways. Some are okay with the home people coming into the school. Florida has a new rule that says that they have to allow outside home professionals to come into the classroom and provide services, which has been an interesting adjustment for our schools. And so some, it varies based on the situation in the district and things like that. In most places that I work, our goal is to move the child into school and provide the program that he needs in school. But we also want to have coordination with the family, so that if they've got a professional working with them at home, we want to make sure that we're on the same page. We sometimes will do monthly meetings. We'll share data. I have a student right now who has a huge team of people from home and school, and we use Dropbox to share videos and pictures and things like that about the child, of what she's done during the day, so the home people can see how it's being done and the school people can see how things are done at home. And that's really helped to kind of both build trust with the family as well as helping to support them on each side and helping this child be successful, and she's been beautifully successful because of it. So I think that collaboration is really a huge piece, and I think school psychologists can work really well with the teachers to help them figure out how can they collaborate in a way that doesn't completely overwhelm their teaching, because I think that's hard. But I do a lot of training with schools personnel in providing discrete trial programs in coordination with home. And generally we will have regular meetings with families to kind of help them coordinate and share information and make sure that we're not working at cross purposes.
Very cool. I want to apologize to anyone watching. I found a dark area in the hotel lobby, or I found a secluded area, which I thought would be good, and now the sun's setting and I'm realizing there's no lights around me, so I've also had some difficulty with my microphone and picking up people, so a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm still here. You might not be able to see me too well.
That's okay.
Very good information.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So it sounds like we can work with teachers and helping make the communication easier, because it's so hard, that part, and taking the time for teachers to communicate with each family and to make that connection and to work together. Do you have any tips for like working with families and how to make that good?
I try, one of the things I do is I try to set up some kind of structured communication system that goes back and forth to home and school. I often will do one that's almost a check-off system so that they can get information, parents can get the information that they want in a way that doesn't involve the school having to write a novel to go home every day. I generally will ask families what they want, because I've had some families that are like, please don't send me a note home every day. I can't look at a note every day. Send me a weekly summary. That I can handle. And I have other families that are like, could you send me an email every 10 minutes? Because then I would really know what's going on. And of course, obviously that's not possible. But there has to be some common ground and some in between. So generally what I do is I set up a structured home note that teachers can fill out quickly, aides can fill out parts of it, and give some substantive information. Like, he did his independent work system completely by himself today. He ate this, this, and this. I have a lot of families and a lot of kids with eating issues.
Yeah.
So their families really want to know, what did he eat today? Don't send the egg salad back to me. I don't want to smell it at the end of the day, but tell me how much of it he ate. So sometimes that is on there. There's also on the back side a system where the parents can send information back to the school, so that the school then has information about how he slept, about what kinds of things he did at home, so that when we're working on some conversational skills, we kind of know the answers before we ask the questions. It's hard to ask a kid, what did you do last night? He goes, well, I rode the Zamboni. And you're like, Went to a hockey game? It's like, he's never been to a hockey game. Okay, well, then that was not the right answer. But if you don't know that, how do you know?
Right.
And so we found that to be really helpful as well. And then I think email makes things a little bit easier because you can do things when it's not in real time as opposed to having to stop and call and things like that. But really figuring out kind of what's going to work for each team, because every teacher is different too. I mean, I have teachers who'll give a lot more information, say, at the beginning of the year, and then as they build the trust with the family, kind of it decreases and the need for it decreases over time. Mm-hmm. And I have others that it's like, I'm not doing that. I don't have time. I can't do that. And so we have to come to some kind of understanding about what's going to work for both groups of people. Mm-hmm. I also really encourage teachers with the idea that positive. Send home things that are positive, because so often we're sending home, he didn't do this, he hit this kid, this happened, and I think we really need to make sure that we're focusing on he did his art project all by himself today. He was independent when he did his bathrooming routine today, or whatever it is. We need to celebrate those activities, and families need to celebrate and hear them as well.
Mm-hmm. On those daily sheets, a lot of my parents like to hear about bathroom. Yeah. Also, the brain-gut connection, what's going on there? A lot of issues in the current school that parents want to know about. You guys had questions I see in our comment bar.
Yeah, well, I'm really wondering because in my program, we spent just a little time learning exactly kind of how to do an FBA well, and we didn't. I feel like that's something that I could really, and I have, made attempts. I have done it, and I keep reading about it and keep trying to learn. But I'm wondering if you could kind of walk us through, for school psychs that do use FBAs or are trying to learn them, kind of like a mini example of what that would be like for you. How you run it, and.
And it really kind of varies based on the situation and the person. I seem to have lost whoever was on the screen.
You did?
Yeah.
I still have us all.
Okay. Maybe it's just me. I just have a big blank screen.
Oh.
Move your mouse. Maybe
okay. Oh, maybe that's what it was. I don't know. No, it went away. When Annie came on, it was there. But but now it's gone again.
Okay.
Fun.
So I hope that things are okay. I don't know.
I actually did a series about that on my blog because I think, and it's kind of long because it's all the different pieces. It kind of takes you from defining the problem all the way through developing a behavior plan.
Right. Okay.
See a behavior plan as being. But I think that the key is you want to observe the behavior as much as possible, trying to figure out as much as you can about what happens before and what happens after. And I think that there's that feeling of people will say, oh, well, we don't know what happens before. Well, sometimes it's because we didn't write it down because we didn't think it was relevant. Mm-hmm. Well, if we knew it was relevant, we wouldn't need to take the data. So the more information that people can collect, the more they're going to be able to kind of find some patterns within the data. But I generally will do an interview with the family, with the school staff, to try to get information, and there's some resources on my blog of interviews that are available to download from different sites. Sorry, I keep going black, and it keeps distracting me. And then from that, I then figure out how I need to take data, whether it's something where I feel comfortable that the teacher really understands what needs to be done and knows how to take data and can take it, whether I need to go into the classroom and take it. I always want to make sure I observe the student so that I am seeing what's going on. We do have a little phenomenon that I call it's always opposite day when I come to visit.
Yeah.
The kid that everybody thought was amazing has a horrible day. The kid that everybody thought was out of his, having a really hard time has the best day he's had all year.
I think psychs can relate to us. School psychs can relate to
I'm sure. And so sometimes, I've had families that have given me videotapes to look at so that I can see how their kid, what their kid is looking like in different kinds of settings. I've had schools that have done the same thing. I generally will take some data, and then from that and the interview, I will look for patterns. If I can't find patterns, I might go in and do more of a manipulation of setting something up to see if I can create a behavior problem. I try not to do that because to me it just seems mean to go into the classroom, set the kid up for a problem, and then go, thank you, that was what I needed to see, now I'll leave. And I don't always have the time to kind of say, now let me stay here for the rest of the day because I know I've messed up your entire day. Because when we mess up a kid's behavior, we don't just mess up an hour for most of them. It's usually the rest of the day falls apart. And so for some kids, I need to go back and really do that kind of, if I do this, what does he do? If I do this, what does he do? And take data on that in more of what we think of as a functional analysis type of approach to experimentally try to figure out what's going on.
I was just going to say that.
Situations, I can kind of get a feel for it from looking at the patterns of the ABC data.
At one of my districts, we had a training from the May Institute, and they talked a little bit about functional analysis versus, assessment, and I thought that was interesting because that was something that we didn't really touch on in my program and whatnot. Can you talk a little bit about the differences, because you referenced that? Yeah,
it's kind of just a difference that kind of evolved over time. It's the difference between an analog functional analysis or an experimental functional analysis where we deliberately run specific conditions so that look at if every time he does this, I reinforce him by, let's say, in an escape condition, every time he hits me, I take the work away. If I do that for a couple sessions of 15 minutes, do I see the behaviors increase? If I attend to him every time he has a behavior problem when there's an issue for a 15-minute session, do the behaviors increase over time? And then a functional assessment is often where we're doing what we think of as a more naturalistic assessment, where we're taking data in the context of their natural environment and trying to come up with some parallels and best guesses about what's going on. A functional analysis will give you an experimental, much more specific function. The problem is if you don't do it in the natural environment where it isn't always feasible to set a kid off, sometimes you have difficulty with generalization between the two. If you ever have the chance to see Greg Hanley, who's actually from Massachusetts, he does a really good talk about a procedure that he uses that kind of combines an interview to gather information and then a short two-condition functional analysis where he deliberately takes the thing that he asks the staff and the family, what's the thing you could do that would guarantee to set this kid off? And then that's what he does. And then he does a control condition where he does what's the thing you could do to guarantee he won't go off? That's the control condition. So if the condition that makes him go off is when you try to take his iPad away and make him go to work, that's what he sets up. And then as soon as the behavior happens, he stops it. And then the control condition is, well, if you just let him keep the iPad, you won't have a problem. They do that, and the behavior problems are low. So it's a way of kind of confirming the information that he gets from the interview. And his interview is actually, I think I linked to it somewhere on my site, and I can find it if anyone's interested, of just the questions that he asked to the staff and the family to try to get that information to set up those two conditions. And he does it, he tries very hard to do it in the natural environment so that all the triggers that are available in that natural environment are still there, as opposed to pulling him out to do a functional assessment where I may not be able to create the whole setting. You know, it's much different to go off and be the class clown in the classroom than it is if I do it in a room with an adult who doesn't respond. You know, and we can't always control. It's not always the best solution, but sometimes that's a good combination of the two.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Rebecca, I think you had some questions too that you were typing out.
I'm just wondering if you have more functions that you find than we do. You know, the general ones we have are escape and attention, sensory. Do you have a wider repertoire of functions that you assign behaviors to?
I would say, and it's funny because my thinking about this has evolved over the years, I would now say that almost all functions kind of fall into one of two categories. You're either trying to get away from something or you're trying to get something. To me, I don't worry so much about the function and its name of whether or not it's attention, escape, or sensory. I worry about what are the specific conditions. So I train my students when they write hypothesis statements, be specific. Say, you know, when he's presented with this kind of situation, he responds with this type of behavior, and this is what normally happens, as opposed to just telling me he tries to escape, because that doesn't tell me what he's trying to escape. He might be trying to escape the cafeteria because socially it's an overwhelming experience. He might be trying to escape the math homework. He might be trying to escape the teacher yelling at him. There are various ways you can look at it, and I see that someone had talked about the debate about power and control being a function. Yeah. I would say that to me, power and control is a function. It's the key to all the functions. We have kids that engage in behavior to get people's attention, and people will say, well, he gets attention all the time. Why would he be having behavior problems? The reason is typically because consistently he can get attention more quickly, more easily, more reliably with the behavior than he can with a more appropriate behavior. Raising his hand, sometimes people don't call on him, calling out the teacher's name, sometimes she tells him to wait and then doesn't come back. But if he falls on the floor and starts screaming, people come every single time. And it's the ability to control gaining the attention that to me is really the big piece for it. And I think we see with a lot of our ED kids, we've seen that for those kids who have emotional difficulties, as opposed to, say, our kids with developmental disabilities, we've really had a hard time figuring out how do we make this model that we develop for individuals with DD match these average functioning kids with emotional disorders. And I think we have to look at some of the automatic reinforcers that play a role. We have some kids who engage in behaviors because it makes their anxiety decrease.
Yeah.
Acting out in a certain way gets me, you know, some level of relief because I no longer have to wonder when the teacher's going to yell at me. She's yelling at me now. I made it happen. It happened faster. And so that's an attention, but again, it's the control piece that's really making it the most efficient and making it the one he chooses.
That makes sense. Chris, I wanted to ask you, because today in our conversation before the podcast, we talked a little bit about the comorbidity in autism with anxiety. You just mentioned anxiety and also depression. When you find that as part of the presenting problem for a student, how do you address that with a behavior plan?
We work a lot on self-regulation. We have some research now that shows that kids with high-functioning autism, particularly with depression and anxiety, respond well to cognitive behavioral therapy. So I have a number of guys that we've recommended that as part of their behavior plan because they need to learn how to rework how they think about situations. You know, they tend to do that. Everything bad is my fault, and everything that's good that happens to me just happens, and I don't have any control over it. And we want to think about, you know, how do we get that self-script rewritten, and then how do we teach them how to manage their anxiety? So we do a lot of relaxation training, a lot of desensitization, a lot of really cognitive behavioral strategies, and then give them supports. I really like the Incredible 5-point scale as a self-regulation. It's easy, it's simple, and everybody has the same kind of language. So if I walk up to a 15-year-old and say, hey, you're looking like a 4, I don't have to say, you're looking like you're out of control. All I have to say is, you're looking like a 4, and he knows what that means. And he knows what to do from that because we've practiced it. I use social stories a lot with those kids just to introduce concepts so that they have like the whole information. I don't necessarily expect the social story to change their behavior, but I know that at least then they've got the whole picture. And it helps them understand a little bit better the perspectives of other people and things like that. So I think the self-regulation, the self-talk, and some of those cognitive behavioral strategies we want to do, but we want to make them concrete, as concrete as possible. So structured like the 5-point scale, and there's an anxiety curve that Carrie Dunbar talks about that uses the same principle. Those kinds of tools that we can pull out where they can see it often really helps our kids.
Yeah.
Because just talking about it doesn't help them because their communication is one of the things that makes them anxious.
Awesome.
I know we're about to wrap up. I had one more quick question for you. We talked a little bit about the similarities between a BCBA and a school psychologist. What are some of the differences? What are some of the things that maybe you might be trained to handle where we're maybe not super informed about? Where should we be deferring to you?
I would say the difference really is just we come at it from a very ABA type of point of view, and you'll meet behavior analysts who have other backgrounds, so they'll come with other tools in their bag as well. I mean, my background's in clinical psychology, so my tool bag is probably a little bit bigger than somebody who just did a master's in ABA. But I think really making sure that we're looking at the observable behavior is one of the things that we're specifically trained to do. And generally, we should be really good at data collection, looking at functional behavior assessments, those kinds of things. School psychologists may have had a lot of training in that. It depends on what program you went to. It depends on where you are. How much ABA knowledge you have is different depending on what kind of program you went through, just like it is for us. But I think that, you know, one of the things that we can't do, we don't do any kind of testing or evaluation or eligibility. That is not something that BCBAs are trained to do or expected to do, which was great because that was the part I didn't like to do, and I was very happy to get rid of it. My PhD is in clinical psychology, but I operate as a behavior analyst, not a psychologist. I just happen to have a lot of experience from my PhD program. And so it's kind of interesting.
What do you do? What if you're called in and you think the child doesn't have autism? Does it matter?
Well, in my ABA world, no, it does not matter.
Okay.
How I'm going to treat him is going to depend on what behaviors demonstrate, what's causing the behavioral issues. I will generally make a recommendation for somebody to evaluate him for eligibility if I think something else is going on, because it opens up funding sources and support. Usually it's the other way around. I don't think I've almost never seen a kid who had a diagnosis of autism that didn't actually have it. I have seen a lot of kids that people said didn't have it that I went, yeah, he does. He really does. Please, evaluate him again. And I do that because understanding that he has autism helps people know how to deal with him. Not because it makes any difference in what I think he needs, but it helps future IEP teams and future service providers have a better understanding of what kinds of supports he's going to need to be successful.
This has been so amazing. Thank you, Chris.
Great.
We got to put your blog link on our page, the School Psyched podcast page, and I want to spend like hours reading through your materials. Thank you.
Get yourself a couple drinks, because I tend to write, and I had somebody tell me the other day, she's like, it's like if you put it all together, you'd have a really big book. I'm like, I know, and I have a hard time, like, breaking the chapters down small enough sometimes.
So thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
Any final comments or anything?
No, I think it's great. I mean, I think that the opportunity for BCBAs and school psychologists to work together is huge, because some of what we do is overlap, but we both bring different things to the table that we can make much better. So, you know, I'm a big fan of collaboration, and I think that the more people we have collaborating, the better solutions we have.
Hear, hear.
You rock. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
I'm going
you.
to wrap up the Psyched podcast, but join us again June 7th. We think we're going to talk about RTI and possibly have Jim Wright join us. So log in and see you guys next month.
All right. See you next month.
Bye.
Bye.